Hey everyone, Jeremy Knauff here with another episode of the Public Relations Declassified live stream. And today we're going to talk about something that you may have seen in the news. Essentially, Atlassian has a bit of a PR crisis brewing, and we're going to use this to kind of break down the PR crisis itself, but also show some of the unexpected things, the hidden risks that you're going to see in a PR crisis, right? The things that could potentially go wrong when a PR crisis is going on. And the reality is there's so much more to this that most people never even think of, right? There's so many things that can go wrong besides just directly the bad publicity. So let's talk a little bit about what the situation is. So first of all, Atlassian had recently conducted a large wave of layoffs. And one of their layoffs was one of their key engineers. Now, after firing this guy, his name was Vasilios Sirakis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was the lead engineer who basically built their entire $1.79 billion infrastructure. So when they unceremoniously fired him, along with all of the other people that they laid off, he went ahead and released a 38-minute breakdown, basically showing exactly how he built everything that he built for them. So I'm going to pull this up real quick here. We'll just kind of like scan around through the video for a second. All right. And then hopefully the audio is coming through on.
I was recently affected by the layoffs made by Atlassian, and I wanted to take some time out to reflect on the time to start a real incident that occurred in Atlassian, and it was an application problem that led to a denial of use with an API, which facilitates the provisioning of metadata about them. And you might say to just pure Flask, creating that we chose for that. Sovereign runs a fast API app and provisioning request. And we also had a little bit of load balancing. Needs to be valid. Where are the access logs? Access maintain software at the beginning. There's just not enough going through. It hasn't been
So you guys get the idea. He went through and did a very, very detailed breakdown of exactly what he built for Atlassian. How it works, how it functions. Now, obviously, there's a lot of information that's not there, right? The configuration, there's probably some a pretty hefty learning curve there. So admittedly, not everyone can just pick up this information and run with it. So let's talk about how this affects Atlassian from a PR perspective, first of all. All right, so the first thing you've got, of course, is the optics of the situation. So lots of bad publicity coming out about them. Pretty much anything that's covering them right now is covering them in a negative light. So if they were trying to raise capital at a time like this, or they were trying to make new acquisitions, create new partnerships, things like that, this publicity, of course, is going to be bad for them. And not because it necessarily is going to have any real direct impact, right? But it's more the perceived impact that it could have, right? So you've got a perceived loss of a proprietary edge. Now, if you've got an engineering background or a software background, you probably already understand that what he released is not really like this big groundbreaking thing, right? Ideas are nowhere near as important as execution. I could be given literally every piece of information about how Amazon runs or how Google runs or how Apple runs. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go ahead and be able to build a company that can outcompete them, right? So there's a perceived loss of a proprietary edge, but in reality, there's not really anything there. There's also a perception of a negative workplace culture, right? If this guy was so critical to the business, why was he fired in such a way, right? Why did he feel so slighted that he had to go out and create this video? That tells people something about the internal workplace culture there. And then, of course, there could be the perception of security vulnerabilities. So if you've got the entire roadmap to how a company runs its business, then you know some potential attack vectors, right? If you know the platforms and you know what those platforms, what their weaknesses are, It makes it a lot easier, especially if we're talking about zero-day exploits, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But it creates the perception of security vulnerabilities, even though it's not necessarily any more vulnerable than any other company. You also have the perception of budgetary or revenue challenges, right? Why are they laying off so many people so abruptly? That says something about what's going on. And this whole story with this guy, this engineer who came out and released the entire, here's how I built everything blueprint. That definitely says something. If they're going to lay off that many people and that many key people, it's going to make other people wonder about the financial solvency of that company. And this doesn't just affect, your clients or even your prospects. Obviously, those folks are going to be very swayed by what they see in the media about you, but this also affects potential partners. It affects employees, and it even affects journalists. So if journalists are seeing a lot of negative information out there about your company, the likelihood is they're going to jump on the negative side of things because that's what's already running. That's what everyone's already talking about. So it's kind of a low-hanging fruit scenario. It's easy for them to write something negative. So the more of this that's out there, the more of a snowball effect it creates to make the problem even larger. So let's talk for a second about the proprietary technology, the processes, all of that, the underlying foundation for the business. So the reason I say this doesn't present a real problem for them is, like I said before, the tech itself is less of the issue. More of the issue is execution, right? It's what you do with that framework. And there's a lot to it that even if you had the entire framework, you couldn't just go execute it because there's other processes that go on behind the scenes related to other areas of the business. There's leadership. There's all kinds of other factors. So this doesn't really change anything from a proprietary tech or a process perspective. And the reality is that those moats are usually pretty short-lived anyway. And what I mean by that is, let's say you do have some kind of really cool proprietary technology where you've built some wild platform that nobody else has. With AI, with all the tools that are available nowadays, it's pretty easy to replicate pretty much anything that exists. So where you may see some degree of, for lack of a better term, I would say corporate espionage, right? They're trying to use your information to outcompete you. You'll see that less with the smaller companies, the companies that are more on your level. Where you will start to see that play a role if you end up in a situation like this is with the institutional backed companies, right? The companies that are owned or managed by private equity, for example. They tend to want to squeeze every single penny out of a business's revenue. And they're very likely to take this kind of information and use it to compete against other companies. Most companies won't have the infrastructure, the knowledge, the ability to actually put it in place, right? I mentioned the zero-day exploits. If you don't have a development background, you maybe haven't heard of that term before, but that's basically an exploit, a vulnerability that has been found in a particular application, and nobody else knows about it yet, right? It's just now announced. And there's a lot of companies that go out and their whole purpose is to find these exploits because then the platforms will pay them a bounty, essentially, for finding it so that they can fix it. All of the platforms that are outlined in this video, this 38-minute video that this engineer created, all of those platforms have various vulnerabilities. Some are known, some are not yet known. But in the event that a known vulnerability is found in one of those platforms, somebody who knows that their infrastructure is built on these tools knows that if they now find a vulnerability in one of those tools, that could give them access to more of the back end for that company. So there's a small increased risk, but it's very small, but the perception of it is much worse. Okay. And then, of course, you've got the HR challenges stemming from this PR crisis. So first of all, they've already had significant layoffs. Those layoffs have been pretty damn abrupt, and it involved key employees, right? People who played a critical role in the building and the growing of that business. So the fact that all of that's going on, and then the fact that the engineer went out and made this video, right? He felt so slighted by how the whole situation went down that he made a video basically breaking down the entire thing. Now, look, part of that is positive PR for him. It shows his knowledge, it shows his expertise, the value that he brings to an organization that he's involved in. So essentially what he's doing is PR, and he's doing it proactively. He's doing it to get his name up, and that's going to help him land another career, I would have to guess, pretty damn quickly. But while it's positive PR for him, it's negative PR for Atlassian. So if I was Atlassian in a position like this, I would be doing everything I could to make the current employees feel valued. I would do everything I could to help this former engineer find a new job quickly so that he stops talking about the company. And I would start doing things that really showed a commitment to the employees, because the HR angle, I think, is going to be the biggest impact to this company. I think it's going to impact them for years to come. And anyone who has spent any time in tech knows how important recruiting is. So if you can't overcome this so that you're able to recruit top tier talent, you're going to fall behind all of the other companies out there. And they don't even have to be in your industry, right? All different industries are always recruiting engineers, programmers, people like that to build certain things for them. They're essentially industry agnostic, right? They're a developer, they're an engineer. They build out systems. It doesn't matter whether you're in the pet food industry or you're in the, government supply industry or any number of other things. Like, the actual industry itself is completely irrelevant. What is relevant is all of these companies have huge tech needs, and they're always looking for really good engineers. So if you don't have the ability to recruit those engineers and other companies get them instead, now that's tremendous lost opportunity for you. So this is where I see the biggest risk from a PR perspective. Is essentially it undercuts the company. It prevents them from being able to do their job, to perform the function that they exist for, which in their case, of course, is building various software. If you can't get the right employees, you can't get the engineers, you can't get the developers, the database people that you need, then you can't build the product that you're trying to sell. And if you lose that edge from having the right employees, you're going to fall behind. So this is the kind of scenario where a PR crisis can have a pretty big impact in ways that other people don't really think about, right? So this wasn't like a data breach where now the company's trust is damaged. This is a completely different scenario, but the implications of this one play out in the company's ability to actually do the job that it exists to do. So this is just an example of how a PR crisis can have far wider implications than anyone generally thinks of. And that's just because most people have never been in a PR crisis, let alone multiple PR crises. So if you don't know how many different ways things could go wrong, you don't know what to look out for. You don't know how to protect yourself. So if you find yourself in a position like this, you have to look beyond the immediate impact. Yes, there's bad publicity. Yes, people are speaking poorly about your company, your brand. But what is the downstream impact? How does this play out in the long term? Beyond the immediate impact, what else could be affected, and what do we need to do to counteract that? So like I said, recruiting is going to be the biggest challenge. So what this company needs to do is they need to really focus hard on showing that they value their employees. It can't be lip service. You have to actually follow through. You have to do the things that demonstrate that you actually care, that it's not just an act, that it's not just a show. Something else that could be really good is having all of the current employees go post something on Glassdoor, which is essentially a review site for employers. So your employees can come to Glassdoor and post reviews about their experience working with the company, right? If you get enough of those, that can help offset some of this negative publicity. Now, keep in mind, you want to be careful who you're asking. You want to make sure that they actually do like the job, they enjoy working there, because if they do put something negative up, that's going to be there probably forever, if not for a long time. And it's really hard to get those taken down, even if they're completely false. So you want to make sure you're asking the right people, and you want to build kind of a consensus, get as many people saying positive things, and that will help kind of guide other people in the same direction. But we want to be careful who we're asking first. We want to build that consensus. We want to build that momentum because, I've seen some bad reviews. There's one. It's a company of someone I know in my circle, and one of their reviews on Glassdoor says the name of the company, and then it says, "Avoid this company like the plague." Right. So that definitely makes people who are considering working there, I would say, skeptical at best, but probably highly distrustful at worst. Right. So these are the kind of things you have to look for. You have to look for, how does this all play out downstream? How can I get ahead of this? What do I need to do to fix the other problems aside from the immediate issue? Because look, the media is going to keep reporting on this. You need to give them a different story to run with. So if you can start highlighting some employees, some of their successes, highlight new programs that you're putting in, these are all great ways to demonstrate that. But if you don't do that, and you're in a situation like Atlassian is here, you're going to end up finding yourself in a very bad spot within anywhere from a few months to a few years. This could be a very long-term thing, right? If you can't recruit, and then that reputation kind of just becomes the default for your company, man, it's really hard to keep going at that point. So take these lessons, apply this, and don't just do this in a crisis. Look at this from the perspective of, how can I avoid the crises in the first place, right? So every one of these PR crises that I've covered, you'll find a turning point where a bad decision was made, and that led to the problem becoming what it was. So in this case, it was how they handled the layoffs, which then triggered this whole series of events. I've covered the Blake Lively PR crisis for a while. And, in her case, she just kept doubling down and attacking more and more people. WordPress, I covered that a year or two ago. That was another example of, poor choices exacerbating a problem. So be proactive, look for opportunities for these kinds of things to happen, and then also be thinking further down the line as to, when this happens, what do I do to get ahead of this? So I hope you guys found this useful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to us on YouTube. If there's someone you can think of that can benefit from the information we share here on Public Relations Declassified, I'd love it if you'd share it with them. And that'll go ahead and segue us into Jeremy's PR PSA for the day. And that is, a PR crisis can hurt your business in ways you'll likely never anticipate, precisely because you've never faced a PR crisis before. Now, this is something that I deal with a lot. I deal with a lot of PR crises for a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries. So I tend to see what can go wrong before it goes wrong, because I've already seen it, right? It's like that Farmers Insurance commercial, right? We know some things because we've seen some things. Same deal here. I've been through so many of these that I can anticipate exactly how it's going to go. I know exactly what's going to happen, how the news cycle is going to play. But if you've not experienced that a few times, you're not going to have that background of knowledge to be able to anticipate what direction things are going to go. So you have to try to be as proactive as you can. Look for any things that could potentially go wrong, and then how those play out over the longer term. And that will help you guys to avoid finding yourself in a situation like Atlassian has here. And we'll be keeping tabs on this one. I'll check back in from time to time, and we may do a follow-up video on it depending on how things play out. But that's going to be a wrap for today, guys. Like I said, hope you guys found value in this. Would love it if you drop a comment, subscribe if you're not already. And if you know anyone who can benefit from this, I'd love it if you'd share it with them or invite them to the Facebook group. All right. Thanks, everyone. And we will see you all on the next episode.